Okay. Um, Let me check something here.
All right.
Okay, so I'll jump into everything. I will have my brother give a brief background on himself and what he's been doing like the past like 5 to 10 years.
All right. So I'm Todd, and I'm currently based in Poland, in Warsaw, Poland. I have lived in a few countries over the past about what are we looking at? Maybe 10 years or so, 10 or 11 years. I've been stateside. That's where I was growing up. And then I had moved to Argentina at the age of 20. I did a study abroad there. And then I decided to extend my stay. I was independently studying, did a little bit of work also. Then I went back to the US, was in the US for about a year. And during that time period, I worked. I worked in the IT sector. And then I went back to Argentina, was there for about another year and a half. So a total of about 3.5 years. And then I decided that I wanted to pursue a business goal of mine, like a enterprise. So I realized how difficult it would be in Argentina to get this off the ground for several reasons. Nothing personal against Argentina. I mean, I really like the country and plan on actually going back there quite soon now. But just with the overall situation, it did not seem practical, and I'm more of a pragmatic person, so I know when to cut my losses, when to acknowledge that okay, if something's not going to work, then I generally just go with what works. I realize that I have to go somewhere where there's more of a market facing economy that would facilitate um, a like new enterprise and having like parts, components, etc., coming in from foreign countries where it would be easier to facilitate, I should say. So moved over to Estonia, got going with that, and then there were some issues, and that's a whole other story. But eventually ended up in Russia where I continued my studies. I did further studies in biotechnology, and essentially that put me in a position where I unfortunately had made some mistakes from the get go that really came back to bite me several years later, after several years following my initial or subsequent arrival to Russia.
Okay, very good. And I you gave a great brief summary there. Now explain to everyone how you came to Russia or what made you go to Russia the first time and how you ended up moving there and eventually doing a degree and working and everything else there.
Well, I thought it was good value. The ruble had gone through another round of depreciation, and I can't recall the exact reason at this time, but there was some motivating factor. This was back in February of 2020, and I know instinctively the thought is it was due to COVID, but I don't believe it was that. I mean, eventually it did depreciate some in part because of COVID, I believe, but there was another motivating factor there, and I cannot recall at this moment. So I saw what was happening with the ruble, and in all honesty, when I first got in there, I met a girl who I really liked, and so I just I decided to stay there. And initially, I wasn't there with the purpose of doing the studies and what came later, but I thought I was feeling okay there, and it's a different sort of country to Estonia. And after having lived in Estonia, you've lived in Estonia as well, and after having
Absolutely.
come from there, I felt like it was something different. And this is something that for those of you who haven't lived in Estonia in the European Union might not be able to relate to, but Estonia just has a different type of culture. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are many things I respect about the country, but if you're, say, a bachelor, you're not going to find it to be the best place to be. Let's just put it like that. You may have to be looking further, say to the east. That's probably your best chances. Maybe even further west, you might have better chances if you're, say, still interested in dating. But in that way, I would highly recommend not going to Estonia if you're a single or bachelor, unless you're totally done with the dating scene and you're just okay going monk mode. Then Estonia can be a great option. And so, with that being said, I was aware of Russia, knew what was going on there, and so I thought that it would be it would have some benefits, let's say, that I wouldn't be able to access in Estonia.
No, that makes total sense. And so, for everyone, just so they understand, Russia and Estonia share borders. They're like right next to each other. There's just like a 200-kilometer distance, or 200 miles. It's about 400-kilometer distance from the capital of Estonia, Tallinn, over to St. Petersburg. So these cities are very close in proximity. You can get to either city within 6 to 7 hours on bus or train. If you're in a car, you can get there in less than 5 hours. So they definitely share borders. If you look at like the history behind Estonia, it's very interesting kind of how these two countries actually had a lot of interaction. They had a lot of in common. And in the time period that the USSR became dominant in the world, and at that point, Russia, which was one and the same with the USSR, they saw Estonia as a great place to control. And so many Estonians, like in the 50s, actually were very thrilled by being a part of the Soviet Union. And that continued for some years until in more recent decades, obviously, they lost their interest in being a part of that federation. But that's important to know. Now, what was your first time going to Russia, visiting Todd, traveling there? Because I believe it was around 2017, correct, that you first went there?
Yes, yeah, it
Okay.
was. It was well. It was going into 2018 because, as you might recall, I had gone back to Argentina briefly at the, I think it was it was either at the way end of 2017 or at the very beginning of 2018, and so I'd gone back there, and then I had heard about your experiences in Russia. It sounded like maybe a place worth trying out. So that was the first time I made my way over there. And I must say, there were some things I really liked. Even to this day, there are things that I respect about the country, but also there's some things that are difficult. And I think that many of us have heard about the Gonzalo Lira, what happened with him and his whole ordeal that he had in Ukraine. And it would be a lie to say that you don't see some of the same characteristics in Russia as well that you'd find over there in Ukraine. And so it's one of these kinds of places that traditionally adheres to the more of an older model, we could say. I think that the liberalism, the system that became dominant in the West, especially following the conclusion of World War II, really became supreme for those of you who are in any of the Western countries. But in some ways, it lived on in the East, even in the form of the Soviet communism in the later years. And even if you look at in East Germany and some of the parties that were allowed there, one of them even had some former influential former NSDAP guys that were involved. So I think that this is one aspect of Soviet history, Russian history, that is often forgotten. People think about the early Bolshevik globalist years and that whole mess. But as time went on, later on, it actually became more of a, we could say, socialism with more Eastern Slavic characteristics.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes total sense. So when you first went to Russia, was it somewhere you immediately found that you would make a move to live there, possibly study there or work?
Yes, I mean, initially I wasn't exactly sure because, again, this is something that you would be more aware of than your viewers, than the people who follow your channel. That I was concerned about the money situation I was in at the time, financially, how I was going to support myself, and also the status of the enterprise that was eventually started. So I wasn't sure how I was going to manage that, but there was definitely great interest there. And it was even before even moving there that I met my first girlfriend from there. She only lasted with me for maybe what, like 7 weeks, 6.5, 7 weeks. But I mean, it was a good time while it lasted.
Yeah, and this actually brings up another question, Todd. Many guys obviously now are looking abroad, like Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, for finding a match. Southeast Asia, of course, is a very common place. What has your experience been? I myself have dated and had a couple girlfriends that were from Russia. What has your experience been dating Russian gals? Was it worth it? And how did the whole situation carry out?
In comparison to what we'd find in the West, to places like the United States, UK, and these countries, of course, it's leap years beyond. It's way better than, say, the USA or Canada, these kinds of countries. Now, is it what it once was? Say, if you went back 30 years, no, it's not. I mean, there's been a considerable amount of westernization. The influence of digital technologies is still ongoing there, even if it is a system that tries to remain independent. There's still a considerable amount of influence that's coming from the West. And even if the effects of digitalization are limited often to Russian speaking people, you still have a profound influence from even the Russian speaking people, because some of these elements actually are they do have sizable followings there, and they aren't necessarily very wholesome voices. And contrary to what some might think in the West, that all of these, what we might consider degenerate voices, or this propaganda, what would be seem like subversive or destructive propaganda, contrary to what some think in the West, that it's all just suppressed. That's not the case. Often the influences of the media are still quite profound, and they have their own voices. And regretfully, many of those voices do have a negative impact on the Russian society and Belarus and other Russian speaking countries. And they're not just shut down, contrary to what maybe Western propagandists want you to believe.
Okay, no, that makes total sense. So you ended up in Russia. You came there in 2020. If I recall correctly, that was like your second or third time. What made you stay there that time? And what were the main things you liked about the country?
It was generally, I thought the value was good. It was a safe place, clean. You've lived in South America, for example. I have also, and we've also lived in the U.S. And you live in these places, and you come to appreciate a country that's safe, that's clean, that where you can have a decent standard of living. That's also that, like I said, that's also safe, and where you have good value, where you're respected for the most part by the opposite sex. And when it comes to all of this anti-European, anti-white propaganda that we see in the West, it's not so prevalent over there. So I thought it would be a good place.
No, and that makes total sense. You first went there, if I recall, to obtain a degree at a university there, a master's degree, which you now
Yeah.
have. What made that come about? Was that to help acquire like residency there? Was that to help establish your footprint there more in Russia?
Yes, it was personal interest, and also, I guess, to help get established. Now, that is where I made the first mistake. Actually, it was maybe the second or third mistake, where when I initially got there, I hadn't registered with MVD. And this is like I think it would be like the Interior Ministry or something like this. and I hadn't registered properly. And then this was the opportunity where I could have been registered. And after completing the program, I would have actually been eligible for no less than permanent residency, possibly even citizenship. I can't remember the law, but certainly permanent residence I would have been eligible for if I had done things properly.
Okay, and so for viewers here, just so they know if they ever try go this path, what things did you do incorrectly, and how would you have done that differently now?
Okay, so right when I got there, I did not register. And I'll be honest, I was too distracted with other things. I was pretty happy just because I was going out of, you could say, the MGTOW monk mode to having a more normal dating market, first of all, which of course we hear in the West that is supposedly Estonia is the normal country, the Western propagandists make you believe. But when it comes to like dating and this kind of stuff, it's not a normal country. I mean, normal is where you as a guy are respected, where if you're a competent, high quality guy, you're respected by the opposite gender. And it shouldn't be super hard to date. So that I was very distracted about. And then I needed a place to live and a couple other things that kept me occupied. And I didn't realize that I had to register with the MVD.
Yeah, it seems like Russia has this really enforced code with immigration. They don't mess around like we have now in the U.S. Now, the U.S. is just like an open door for almost anyone to come in. And going back briefly, you mentioned this whole MGTOW monk mode in Estonia. Can you briefly kind of give some examples of your dating in Estonia compared to over in Russia and how those differed?
Yes. So like most of this era, I'm a millennial. I'm the younger side of millennials, but still considered millennial. I have maybe regretfully or just inevitably relied on dating apps for dating. And also, I'm willing to meet gals in person, but that's often not as easy as what it once was. Contrary to maybe popular notion, it's not so easy just to go out and get numbers, get dates, because even if you're getting numbers or if you're putting yourself out there, girl might not be interested. They might think they can do better. They're always online, so they're always being inundated with constant like what they think is normal, like what these I guess nines or tens, these guys that are like hopping on private jets and going to Abu Dhabi and stuff like this. They think this is the norm. And this, as we know, this is not the norm. For those of you who have half a brain, realize that this is by far not the norm, but many girls think that's the norm. And so in Estonia, this is a country that has been profoundly influenced by Western propaganda. This was one of the targeted countries of the United States of Western global homo. And again, I don't mean this as a diss to all Estonian people. I have some friends that are still some guys, some good guys, and there are some great guys from Estonia. So it's no diss to them, but their country was put under what I call Western global homo occupation. And so you have the European Union, you have, of course, it's part of NATO. It's allied with every single globalist Western entity that you could imagine. And so most of the Estonians speak very proficiently in English, as my brother can attest to, since he had also lived there. People might think, oh, that's a good thing. People can speak English, right? Well, in today's world, that's often not a good thing if we're talking dating, because from my experience, what I've seen is that you're better off in places where the population often doesn't speak English. If you want someone that actually embodies their own culture and isn't so inundated with a lot of these negative cultural elements. And one other thing is that if, say, you're a person that can speak that local language, the people, you're not going to have as much competition from foreign people, because quite frankly, you speak that language. Most of the people don't speak English, so it sets you apart. So yeah, in general, dating was awful in Estonia. And as I said, if you're a bachelor, you're a guy that is hoping to, I don't know, girlfriend, casual date, marriage, whatever, in any of these categories, I wouldn't recommend going.
No, and that makes total sense. What do you mean when you say global homo? Some viewers here may not know what that term or concept means. Can you briefly summarize that?
Yes. So some might perceive that as being homosexual, when homo, like homosexual, and that's actually not what it means. What it actually means is homogenous. So globally homogenous. And so we think about countries, often Western countries, that adhere to a certain kind of cookie cutter model. Everything remains the same. It's not really that much different. It's the same stupid values, jokes, ideas that are being repeated over and over. The culture is usually degenerate, decadent. And so the term that not only me, but many others in the, I guess what people call the distant right often use, is globa homo.
Okay, very, very interesting. And I've heard this term thrown around quite a bit now, and it seems to be becoming more well known. Okay, so you're in Russia. It was 2020, and you ended up spending multiple years there.
Yes.
During that time, obviously, you obtained your university degree. Is that an experience that you would recommend for viewers if they're looking at getting like a undergraduate or graduate degree? Go to Russia or go to an Eastern European country where it's a lot cheaper than here stateside, where you might pay 40 to 100 plus grand to spend quite a bit less, and you attended one of the best research universities in Russia. Would you recommend this?
Yes, I would. For purposes of reestablishing, you can study with very high quality students in Russia. There is a very talented pool of people. And something that I really liked about the country is that you can meet such high quality, dynamic people, which is something that regretfully you don't find as much of in South America. At least my experience there. While there are many things I like about, say, Argentina, where I lived, you just don't find the same caliber of people. So the possibility that you can study or work around very educated, talented people is great. You can learn new skills and ultimately have the possibility of entering their labor market and or getting permanent residency or citizenship if you so desire.
Okay, very fascinating. And overall living costs, even if you're in one of the premier cities like St. Petersburg, Moscow, you're going to be paying a phenomenal rate. And if we go to one of these provincial cities like Samara or Novosibirsk, or where you just were, which was in the south of Russia, what was the name of that city?
Oh, Krasnodar.
Krasnodar.
Yeah.
These cities are really reasonable if you're someone that's on a tight budget and have a great experience, correct?
Yes, I can say for example, the apartment that I was renting in St. Petersburg was 38,000 rubles a month, which I'm not sure what that is on the current exchange rate, but I'm thinking that's about what, maybe $350, 340, 350.
Hmm.
And I mean that's considered on the higher end in Russia. When I was in Krasnodar, I was in a it was just a little bit more than that, but again, it was in the threes range, hundreds wise. And I contrast that to here in Poland, where you might be spending $1,000 for a decent place, and it won't even be that big. Of course, you can get into something that's cheaper if you go way outside the city or you go into some kind of building that's not as good. You certainly can get into something that's cheaper, like in Warsaw. But in terms of the value, there's no comparison.
Wow. And also something that Todd had told me, my brother, one side note, if you go to a Russian university, we have all this wokeness, obviously, in universities now in America. I myself work in education at the moment, but many people here are probably wondering, and there's a lot of this wokeness in across from university all the way down to kindergarten or first grade. over in Russia, would you say there's a more balanced situation there? Like there's not just one political side that runs the whole academia?
Correct. The ruling party in Russia is United Russia, although Putin, I think, is running as an independent now. But the ruling party is United Russia, but they do have a sort of coalition with the Communist Party. And when I say Communist Party, I'm not talking about these libtards that we have over in America that are the synthetic left, these fake socialists. I'm not here to defend communism. I'm just saying that what these people represent is not real communism. Again, I don't identify as a communist, but what they represent is not real communism. I'll just throw that out there. So you got a coalition of generally more nationalistic parties, and they are pro-Russian. They're, like my brother said, they're not pushing all these absurd values, and they respect different nationalities.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and Russia is absolutely a country of different nationalities, different ethnic groups. You have Asians, Middle Eastern, and the Caucasus region. Obviously, Europeans. You have Germanic groups, obviously, that migrated there some years ago, decades ago, and they're still coming there. So Russia truly is a globalized country, unlike what the mainstream media is often telling us. It's much more naturally diverse. Okay, so let's speed it up here.
Yeah.
You're 2021. Is that correct? When you were nearing the completion of your degree, or
That
was
was
it 2022?
2022, summer of 2022.
Okay, so it was the summer of 2022. You had finished your degree. At this point, you were on a student visa, correct?
Well, and see, that's where the issue started. I actually didn't have the student visa. I never procured it.
Okay, and so you never actually had the student visa. Why was that?
It was my own carelessness. I'm not going to beat
Okay,
around the bush and make up excuses. It was just my own carelessness.
so you had like a temporary permit, correct?
I should have, yes. If I had done the paperwork adequately, I would have had some kind of temporary residence. And then upon the completion of the degree, I can't remember, I was either eligible for permanent residency or applying outright for citizenship, provided that I could complete a Russian proficiency exam, I believe.
Okay, very interesting. So you had just finished your degree, and did you have an ideal that you could have serious problems when you tried to depart Russia, or if you wanted to do anything else there?
I had an idea that it was an issue. I didn't realize that it was something that could put you behind bars, but I did think it could be somewhat of a problem.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, you're looking at your options, and can you kind of lay out what were your options at that point with having finished the degree, and where you could go or what you could do?
Yes. So really, I by that point it was already too late as far as extending my stay in Russia. Well. Let me step back here. I could have worked through a lawyer maybe to have tried to fix the problem, but I would have my paperwork and trying to outright go for a permanent residency was not going to be possible. I would have had to have started the process over again. So basically, to fast forward, I went through 2022. I was doing some work online, and then I had done some travel to the second place I lived, Krasnodar, and I knew it was going to be a problem at that point, but I didn't know how big of an issue it would be. And so during that time period, I did some travel, but I was having difficulty, like say if I was traveling, finding places to stay because they required me to be registered, to have a registration, and I had also lost my passport prior. So I got an emergency passport, but I didn't have a valid visa in the passport. I didn't have registration. So, for example, I might stay at a hotel and then get kicked out or something of this nature. So overall, it was just a real hassle trying to do anything. I couldn't open a bank account, any number of things. And keep in mind, this was when there was the war, so Western financial institutions and all kinds of Western companies had basically cut off business with Russia. So it wasn't so easy. You couldn't just use like a foreign debit card.
Okay. And just so everyone knows here, Todd did his degree in St. Petersburg. Where he
Yes.
ended up spending time after was in the south of Russia. It's about 1,200 miles or 1,700 kilometers. It's called Krasnodar. It's actually very close to the Ukrainian border. So this distance, many people obviously would fly. Some people may take like a high-speed train, at least partially, to get down there. It's pretty far distance. Now, you brought up this concept of being registered. My understanding was that you were renting an apartment in St. Petersburg up until you left St. Petersburg. You moved down south. What exactly is this registration? Is this necessary for both renting an apartment and also for short-term stays like hotels or whatnot?
And like if you stay in a hotel, they'll automatically register you. But
Okay.
if you're staying at like an apartment, technically each time you move to a different place or stay in a different place, you have to re-register yourself officially. Not sure how it is now. Before they weren't as what's the word? They weren't as worried about that, the Russian authorities. What they were more worried about is, do you have a valid visa?
I see. And so the registration for everyone, this was a concept that was prevalent in most of Europe, even places like France or Sweden. If we go back to like late 1980s, almost every country in Europe, you needed a registration. Many countries also at that time required visas, and essentially it was to keep records of people and what they were doing and if and when they were going to leave the country. Okay, so Todd was in Krasnodar at this point, and at which point did you make your decision on if you were going to stay there or leave the country, or what? What were your other options?
Well, I was seeing if I could get the situation fixed. At that point, I realized that I wasn't going to be probably eligible to get permanent residency outright because I had screwed things up from back in 2020. So I was trying to see if I could maybe get the situation remedied some other way. And I preemptively went to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the MVD, to try to get things moving forward. And I was initially told that that I needed to show some documentation and that they could issue me an exit visa. And ultimately, what this person initially told me wasn't what actually happened. So I didn't get
Okay,
it.
and so that this agency is like the Russian border police, basically. And what exactly did this woman tell you was going to happen?
Well, she said, okay, you need to present certain documents, initial copy of I think it was the visa, initial visa. There's a little slip of paper when you enter the country, and passport picture and a few other things, and that they could issue me an exit visa so that they wouldn't have to deport me, which would then um, cause me to catch an entry ban, which could be, say, 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or some other time period. So that's what I tried to do. Presented this, and it was a no go.
Makes sense. And so also, so everyone knows, Russia is one of these countries where, as Todd has stated, you can't just leave. You cannot, like, if you say go to Estonia right across the border and you overstay your 90-day Schengen visa, if you're, say, part of the US, you could just go to the border of Estonia and leave, and you'll be banned from re-entry for like, I believe it's half a year or close to a year, and then you can come back. But there's no repercussions. 90 some percent of the time, you don't pay a fine or anything. Whereas in Russia, if you do this, you're basically penalized, and it's quite severe. Like I said, you can't just like get to the border and say, okay, I want to leave and I won't come back for so much time. That doesn't work, correct, Todd?
Yes.
Okay.
And additionally, I would also add that I was looking at the possibility of making an illegal border crossing, figuring out there were a couple areas I had scoped out where I could maybe illegally cross. And I wasn't, I was really kind of torn if I should go that route, because I knew that would maybe help me avoid the entry ban, and also if there was if there were other repercussions.
Okay, that's a really interesting situation because especially right now in the U.S., there's so many illegals that cross the Rio Grande. There, the mountains. There's a lot of border tunnels. I don't know if border tunnels exist in Russia. Do illegal border crossings happen with anyone there? And how difficult is it? And do people usually cross through like the Caucasus or take a ship to a like a neighboring port city of a different country?
They happen all the time. Usually between, say, like Central Asia, some of the Central Asian republics, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, these places. But the people that are often crossing, they're locals from those countries. They know where to cross, and they have an idea of the landscape. Also, I think now between Ukraine and Russia, where the war's happening, the Donbass region, a lot of these people. But keep in mind, those people can cross back and forth pretty easily because they're basically like the same people. Ukrainians and Russians are Eastern Slavic people. Many of them, even though it's technically illegal for Ukrainians, will have both Ukrainian and Russian passports. I even met a girl here in Poland where she identified as Ukrainian from the Donbass region, but somehow she also had a Russian passport. So she was, I guess, both a Russian and a Ukrainian, even though Ukrainians say that's not possible.
Yes, and I remember meeting a couple of people myself in that situation. One of my ex-girlfriends actually had a mom who was Ukrainian. Her dad was Russian, and I don't know if she had both passports, but yeah, this is not an uncommon situation. Um, Someone asked if Gonzalo Lira, could he have escaped Ukraine illegally?
Yes.
Okay, or he could have gone through Ukraine from, or he could have gone from Ukraine to Russia, most likely.
Yes, in fact, I mean, I don't say this in disrespect to him or his family, but I think he made a very foolish move in trying to cross over the border with Hungary. And I tried when they came to my attention, that's what he was trying to do. I personally sent him a message, even though I knew it was highly unlikely to reach him, in which I told him not to do that because I knew that they wouldn't let him through. But what he could have done is he could have gone through. He could have worked with a person who specialized in this, some kind of smuggler. John Mark Dugan, he goes by Bad Wolf. He was getting quite big on YouTube, and then they, of course, censored him, shut him down. Or Mike Jones. John Mark Dugan seems to have some pretty high-level contacts in the Ministry of Internal Affairs as well as the Russian military. So I think that realistically, that would have been his best bet, to have him help him, like smuggle him out, or try to arrange it himself. As far as I know, he had family there, which, I mean, that seems crazy to me. That's a whole other story. The fact that if he had family through his kids, why didn't one of his wife or his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend, why didn't one of those relatives try to help him? So yeah, it was possible. He could have even tried to do it on his own. I'm not sure if that would have been the best idea, but he certainly would have had much better odds doing it that way, going through even potential minefields than trying to go through a checkpoint where they were clearly not going to let him go through.
No, and rest in peace to Gonzalo. He was a very prolific person, very prolific writer, cinematographer. He was a very creative person. Now, moving back to when you were in Krasnodar,
Yeah.
so you went, this person misinformed you. She said that you would have no problem getting out of the country through conventional means. So when did you realize that wouldn't work, and what next came after this?
The next part was pretty quick. The person told me that it wasn't going to work. She said I would need a court order. So I took the steps to do that. I think I went to another some sort of division of the MVD, the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They had another office in Krasnodar. I went there to submit I needed to submit a report to them, and then from there, I went to the we went to the police commissary. It was like a court building. This was the actual criminal police. And I knew at that point that something was wrong, but I wasn't quite sure. And then we got there, and then that's where they formally detained me or arrested me. And it was quite surprising because I was not expecting it to happen like that, but that's what occurred. So at that point, I was in custody or in detainment until I ultimately was kicked out. And when you're in detainment, like whether it's in America or Russia or wherever, you are under supervision 24/7. Like if I can make a comparison, it's almost like being treated it's like you're an adult. Maybe you can remember when you were a child and your parents are always supervising you when you're a small child. And that's the closest comparison I can give to it, that you're under their constant supervision and you don't have any freedom.
Yes, and this is the internationally, this is the experience of being incarcerated. In jail, there is no sense of freedom. There's no liberties, and yeah, you're stripped of any of those kind of comforts. So your first day or first few days, were you actually in like a conventional Russian jail, or was it an actual deportation jail?
I was in the first day, the first night, I was in a criminal jail, and I was being held like in a holding cell, and there were it was like really like just normal old school holding cell on the I don't know what the dimensions were. Let's say going across, maybe it was 3 meters, perhaps 4 meters, like going across, like from you entered, and then going back, it was longer, maybe 8 meters. I'm not exactly sure. It wasn't that big, and they had a kind of how do I put this, like there was built around all of the sides. It was kind of this thing you could like sit on this. How would I put this? Like this elevated sort of ledge that ran along all of the along the walls, like from like that across, and then going up the other side, and then also you got like a mat to sleep on. It's quite dark, and there was no kind of entertainment, no toilet, anything.
Okay, yeah, and what was this like? Just so everyone knows here, Todd had never been in jail, for anything back in the U.S. or any other country he had lived in. So being for the first time in a jail in a foreign country, this must have been a totally different experience. And what were the people like that you were around? How many people were there?
I was the first one for the day that got there, and then it slowly more and more people. Some were foreign, others were Russian. Typically low-level offenders, and then there were some other foreign people as well. One of the guys, for example, was a Russian guy who got stopped by some cops, and the cop wanted a bribe, and he wouldn't give it to him, so he got basically detained. And I'm not just throwing Russia under the bus. This is just reality. things that happen if you live over there, and it's even a lot worse in Ukraine. One of the reasons why, going back to Gonzalo Lira, I knew that guy was royally screwed is because knowing how these Eastern Slavic countries are, especially a country like Ukraine, and to them, he's like this anti-Ukrainian propagandist. And sorry, this is going off in a bit of a tangent, but I've had Russians threaten me for simply offending them. I've had some very unpleasant encounters here in Poland with some Ukrainians because simply I was asking a question in passing about an immigration situation, and I had just said, "I know you're from Ukraine, blah blah blah," like because I know you're from Ukraine, I know you're from a different country, so I have a question. Oh, I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking about Ukraine. In just this very just authoritarian anti-free speech. That's how Ukrainians are. It's disgusting, and this is what America is supporting. And it's just and like I said, that's how I knew that Gonzalo Lira was royally screwed. Because if that's the treatment I'm receiving for simply asking a question about an immigration matter, because I dare to say Ukraine, because that's where the person was from, one can only imagine what kind of treatment that guy would face in what he was saying, because they don't respect free speech. They are a country that is completely despicable in many ways. And yet, of course, the United States supports it. I mean, the deep state. But yeah, going back though, this guy got caught up. He got arrested. He didn't pay the bribe, so they put him in holding. And then he ended up getting released the next day. But I was there overnight, or I was there most of the day overnight. And then we got loaded up into some vans and got taken to court.
Okay, so and you were in Krasnodar at this point.
Yes.
The southern city, provincial city. I live in a provincial city, folks. If you can see the map in front of me, I actually live in West Florida. Provincial cities, of course, are different than capital cities. How far was this distance that they had to take you from the court, from wherever you were held in Krasnodar to this other city? What was the distance there?
Well, that was after I'd gone to court. So we went around to different, both more like a criminal court as well as a Ministry of Internal Affairs court that was handling immigration related affairs. So I was handled through an MVD court, and I had to wait actually until all the other people, until the criminal court people had gone through. And then we got to the MVD court, and I remember there were two women. They were Russian Kazakhs, like Russian speaking Kazakh women. And both of them ended up being able to stay because they like the situation for them is different. Often they're just seen like Russians in Russia. So, but in my case, it didn't go in my favor. And instead of just giving me an order that I had to leave, say within 7 days, they took me into custodial, what's it called? Into custodial detainment, I think is the word.
Okay. Before I proceed forth with that custodial, Malcolm asked me, I'm assuming you're doing all this above board, but couldn't you grease the right palms to get people to look the other way, like bribe people?
Yes, and again, in a country like that, certainly, the problem is that I wasn't really connected with the right people. And to be fair, my Russian needs a lot of work, and so I think that if I could communicate at the same level and say English, or that I can in English or Spanish, for instance, it would be a different situation. But my Russian wasn't so good, and I regretfully didn't put enough time into that, enough time, effort, take classes like I should have. But yeah, it was just not going to work for me.
Yeah, and so this is a lesson for everyone. You go to somewhere like Russia or anywhere else that's like a big empire, China's the same way. It really helps to know the language. And that also makes me think of something else. What about a lawyer? Did you try finding a attorney in, say, Krasnodar who could try help you with this case and give you an alternative, or did that not do
Um,
anything?
okay, so and that's where I was already looking at legal counsel, but unfortunately, I preemptively started things too quick, and so it what I should have done is before I even went to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, I should have been in contact with an attorney. And in fact, I didn't have to even do this in Krasnodar. I should have done that prior, and then the results would have gone a different way, I think, or the outcome would have gone a different way.
So there was potentially legal recourse if you had known stuff that you unfortunately didn't know about. And okay, so that takes you. You were in this detention status. What was it called again?
It was a like cu- in custody, some sort of
Custodial.
yeah.
Okay, so at that point, did you know, like, say, how long you were going to be incarcerated for, and what was going to happen, and anything else? Because anyone here who doesn't know, something to know about Russians, as like a people and a system, they're very both elusive, and there's not a lot of like communication with matters. I recall back in 2019, I had a gym membership at a well-known gym in St. Petersburg, and what happened was in July of 2019, this gym, this franchise ended up going under. They just simply couldn't make enough money. It was a big company. So they shut down. I got no kind of notification, if anyone can believe that. I went there like I had been out of the country for a couple of weeks, went to the gym, and then I saw they were shut down. And then I found out like shortly after that they had financial problems and I had to find somewhere else. But that's a very typical Russian situation there. And that's why I inquired to my brother about that, because that's one major issue of Russia compared to other countries, even in Europe.
Yeah, and and that's kind of the paradox is it's this level of disorganization, this level of instability that for those who found Tyler's channel through like say MGTOW or something, that's kind of the unfortunate reality is that if you want these countries that are want to go to countries that are like better for dating, usually there's going to be a lot of uncertainties, and I think that's often why women appreciate high quality guys is because they don't have some big daddy government, some gynocentric big daddy government like here in the European Union that's just going to bend over backwards for them and ensure they have an easy life where they're not held accountable much of the time. Different situation in Russia.
Yeah, and so this goes back to Todd's detainment.
Yeah.
Didn't really have any idea of what was going to happen, where this was going to go. So then what was the next stage here?
Basically, so after I went through court, I got the tried to present my case, tried to make it so that I could voluntarily leave, so I didn't get the deportation order. But it didn't go that way, so I got the deportation order, and at that point, that stipulated that I would receive either a 3 or 5 year entry ban. I can't remember if I found out in the court or if it was after that they told me, but then they just held me in custody. They wouldn't let me go,
Mm-hmm.
and I was at the court for the rest of the day.
Okay, and so for a timeline here, this was around, at this point, it was around March, correct? Of 2023,
Early February
or
is when
early
I
February of 2023.
yeah.
Okay, so you found that out. Did they tell you approximately how long you would then have to spend in Russia from that day before
No.
you could? Okay, so yeah, Todd did not know. He didn't have a clue or idea of where he was going to go and what then was going to follow this. At that point, did they transport you somewhere else, a different like detention facility, or did you stay there?
Yeah, so they put me into a van, and at first we went to what was basically a hotel, and I thought, wow,
Mhm.
this is nice. They're going to put me up in a hotel like in America. But what they were doing is this was a hotel that was converted for refugees that were coming from the Donbass region where the war is going on. So Russian government pays the hotel, and then they can host these people. And this isn't like in America where you have all this riffraff and they're going to like be really messy and stuff. No, I mean they kept it like they were very tidy from what I could see, and these were just refugees that had to stay there. But we had to stop by there. I'm not sure why. I think it was so that they it was another guy that actually took over at that point to getting me to the final location. So we were inside there briefly, and so they had kind of it looked like a sort of like in the office area. They had like it almost looked like a military type of facility. In the office area, they had like military related paraphernalia. The guys that were there were dressed in military style fatigues and everything. So yeah, basically that at that point, this other guy took over. We got into the van, and then he took me to what basically was like a prison, I guess, in America.
Okay, and it appears too that they didn't actually. Fortunately, Todd didn't have to have handcuffs put on him, or
Yeah,
some of the
no
other
handcuffs.
things people think of. There were no jumpsuits. Jumpsuits are quintessential, obviously, here in the U.S. Some of these big name politicians have recently been outfitted with jumpsuits, and hopefully, some other people, we all know who they are, will also get those pretty soon. No jumpsuits there. You guys keep your clothing over there. Your shoes also, correct? No shackles.
Correct. So if
Okay.
in let me clarify this. If you're in the custody of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, correct. No, there's no uniforms. If you're in Ukraine, also, if you're like in a criminal prison in Ukraine, what I was told by some guys that were coming from the criminal prisons there is that you don't have to wear like the jumpsuits or anything like this. So that's even why some you might have seen the pictures of Gonzalo Lira where he just was wearing normal street clothes. Whereas in Russia, if you're in a criminal prison, it's not as ostentatious as a jumpsuit. It's like a black jacket, these black pants. It's like a cotton, I guess, or cotton or polyester. I don't know. And then it has like a silver, like I think, kind of a silver stripe on the either sleeve and then on the leg. As I said, it doesn't look as ostentatious. I saw a number of guys where I was being locked up that were wearing these, and but if you're in the MVD detainment centers, they don't have you wear those. You just wear your street clothes.
Okay, interesting. And that's another big thing here is that a deportation jail is still more similar to a level. I would say it's a lower to mid security prison in America, or whereas like there are what would be like high security prisons. Unfortunately, most immigration offenses don't require that. Also, when you were going through the process, did they strip search you like they do here in the States or anything of that nature?
Yes.
Okay. And what did that strip searching entail?
It wasn't.
And was it both men and women, like guards and stuff?
Yes, although it was mostly male.
Okay.
And when I got there, it was just males that were working. So I don't think I had to cough or anything like this, like bend
Mhm.
over. I did have to strip search, but I mean these were
Completely
just,
naked?
yes.
Okay. Yep.
And I mean I know some people might not like, they might not feel that comfortable with that. I didn't care. I mean, they're guys. I know that they're not like some they're not like, they're doing their jobs, so it's like whatever. I mean, it's just what it is. I don't really care that much.
In some of it too, I guess it's the same reason here in the US they do it for checking if people put drugs up canals or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And that also takes another question. Did you see a lot of drug usage there or people smuggling like that?
There was some. There was some,
Okay.
probably not to the same degree as in the U.S., but yeah, there definitely there was some.
And I would suspect that the people probably also had really good methods of concealing these practices to such a degree that even other convicts or other people detained wouldn't have a clue that they were doing such a thing, correct?
Yeah, in general, people were quite clever. I think if there's anything that people can learn from being in the former Soviet bloc, it's that
Oh,
in some ways, I think these people are often more clever, at least nowadays, than what you find stateside.
okay. Now, someone here, Noble, had a question. Do you get beat up by other prisoners or guards, or did you know anyone that was
Um,
in that situation?
yes,
Okay.
there were some people, and I wasn't one of them. I actually did fine. I mean, I was respectful. I didn't run my mouth about other people. It's some of the same things. If you hear the Americans like Cox, who's that? Uh, what's that guy's name? Cox, Sean Cox,
Yeah,
or no?
Matthew Cox
Matthew Cox. Yeah,
from Florida. Yep.
right, right. So if you've seen Matthew Cox and his experience of being in prison, he's talked about this also, where if you're not running up debts or talking bad about people and things like this, you're just, you respect people, you're not dirty, you'll be fine. I think that if you're getting involved in some of the internal politics, or you're getting into debt or running your mouth about people, you could start having some issues.
Yeah, and so it seems like you have some of the same political structures there in Russian jail, like you see here stateside.
Yeah.
You have this concept of a shot caller or other dynamic, like other leaders in the prison. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
jail?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Correct.
And
The
what determined those leaders, and how did they get put in there?
See, I'm not quite sure about that, because when I got there, it was a Georgian guy and a
Mhm.
couple guys around him that were either Georgian, or they were from what's it called, Ossetia,
Mhm.
or Abkhazia, I think it was.
Mhm.
And they were effectively the internal political structure. So they were essentially calling the shots. It's not like there weren't like any murders or anything like this. As far as I know, there weren't sexual assaults either. That's something that I'm not saying it doesn't happen in the Russian system, in the criminal prisons, but at least at that level, I didn't see or hear anything like that occurring. Like the booty bandits that you hear about in the U.S., none of that.
Yeah, it's interesting these patterns of homosexuality that we see often, especially in like American Canadian prisons. There's such a prevalence of them, and I have suspicions that who knows, maybe there's feds that implant certain behaviors in the U.S. prisons, or maybe another way of looking at it is it's just kind of like a permutation, or it's like a what you see in day-to-day society with the LGBT lifestyle that just replicates in prison or jail. But like Todd said, this isn't a big deal over in Russia. You're not going like we saw with Brittany Griner, this lesbian WNBA player. She's not going to have some high status there in a jail there like she would if she was in a U.S. jail or prison, which is obviously a lot different. Okay, so when you were there, you met some really awesome people too. That just like if you were maybe in a U.S. jail or somewhere else, that really helped the experience. Can you talk a bit about that and some maybe stories related to that?
Yeah, so there was an individual, he was a Latino American or Chicano American. His name was Jaime, and honestly, I didn't really in the states. not that like I have any personal issue with people of other ethnicities, but usually I didn't have a lot of communication with people of that kind of background. Despite the fact that I do speak fluent Spanish, I generally just didn't have that much interaction. So it was actually there where I learned more about that culture. He's from LA, from California, or no, not LA. He's from, I think, a smaller city, and he actually had some background in the U.S. System, but he had gotten out of the this sort of delinquent lifestyle at a young enough age where he didn't catch any major like criminal offenses, and he ended up doing other stuff like legitimate work after in real estate. And so he was really a tremendous resource because he's a little bit older than me, and having been in the American system, he had been as I say, he had definitely been involved in some stuff in the U.S. I think he was really a great asset. He really treated me well. Like he was respectful, and we were situated in a kind of a holding cell with other people who were from other like non like say minority ethnic or national groups. Typically, their people are housed with their ethnicity or nationality. So, for example, Ukrainians with Ukrainians, Uzbeks with Uzbeks, Armenians with Armenians. And if you were like in my case, where you were more of a, I guess, kind of an ethnic minority, then you were classed with the others. And I think it's something similar in the US also, where if you're part of some kind of like really small minority, they put you with the others. Same way in Russia. So that's where I met him. He was right next to me. And then under me, actually on the bunk bed, was a guy who was Russian of all places, and he's still there to this day. He's had some tremendous issues because he had lost all his documentation when he had moved over to Ukraine. Was married for a couple years back a long time ago, tried to re-enter Russia, and then had a lot of problems. So I was with him, and then there were some guys of a couple other backgrounds. There's, I think, two guys from Armenia, but they weren't as connected with other Armenians, so they didn't want to be with him. And then I think there were two Uzbeks and a guy from Kazakhstan when I initially got there. But it was very fluid. People were coming and going. So inside, I generally try to, as I said, like be as like just not get involved in too much trouble. Of course, I did have to show myself not to be like a weak pushover, but at the same time, I wasn't getting involved in the internal politics. When I actually was able to get out quicker, what I did is I did work with the internal political hierarchy there, so I could basically bribe and get the release set quicker. What's that? Yeah, and so I was able to grease the wheels and get it going faster. So again, I'm not on here to say to like throw the Russians under the bus or anything. As I said, I own up to the mistakes I made, but I wanted to minimize my stay there, and so like during the time there though, I was active. I tried to like exercise, and there were people that did offer to like where we'd have like coffee together, and I talked with different people, and it was interesting. A lot of interesting people in there.
Yeah, it is interesting. So these guys you were with also, I know were all they had like similar situations, but you had also mentioned that some of these guys actually ended up remaining in Russia. They did not want to leave the country, which kind of shows you something about the situation in some of their home countries. They would prefer staying there.
True. And there were a lot of guys that were also from Ukraine who were sent from the incarceration, the jails, prisons there, because they were in imminent danger by the none other than the Ukrainians. If they had been like if they had been taken by the Ukrainians could have used them. I mean, when I say cannon fodder, I mean I truly mean as cannon fodder, where they would have just thrown them, like basically be like human, maybe not human sacrifices, but just human shields. They would have just thrown them into battle, knowing that, okay, or looking at them like these are scumbags. We don't care about them. And so the Russians knew this. And to their credit, they were taking these people into detainment as like kind of a protective custody.
Yeah. And that's another thing too that's interesting, because when Todd was incarcerated, this was, of course, around a 1 year anniversary of this Ukraine-Russia situation. Do you think that at all made an impact on what played out with you, and maybe the options you had for getting out of the country?
Yes,
Okay.
I would say so, because while I would like to say that Russia has everything under control, I think that the war is going in Russia's favor. But with that being said, there's still struggles, and Russia isn't taking internal security as lightly as it was before. So I would say that it did limit my options.
Interesting. Because yeah, when like obviously when Todd arrived to Russia, it was like right around the start, or right at the start of COVID, and he was there through some of the biggest events that have happened in the 21st century now. Also, um, with okay, so you were in deportation there. How were you treated by like other, like say the guards there? And what liberties were given to you guys while there?
It was like, I guess what would it be in America, like medium security prison,
Hmm.
I think, because the guy that I was with, this friend of mine, Jaime, he had been in jail in the U.S., and he said that it wouldn't be a camp, it would be higher than a camp. He said it would be something like kind of a medium security prison,
Hmm.
and so we were. I mean, of course, our movements were very limited. We couldn't like generally couldn't go outside. There was an open like the high walls and the razor wire and all of that. There was kind of this open area where they would let you go out. I think it was on Sunday, I believe, Saturday or Sunday. You could go out for like an hour or so. What was more of an issue too was a lot of illness. And this is something that with Gonzalo Lira, going back to his situation, I think that this was one of the other issues with him. Is that what you need to keep in mind is when you're in these kinds of places, you can't just like go at like just leave or something. Like you're stuck around a lot of people, and so if you find yourself sick or getting sick, and then on top of that, you're being beaten up or tortured by like guards or other people, you're going to feel miserable because you are like stuck with these people. So the respiratory illnesses were a big issue. A lot of people with, I think, pneumonia, bronchitis, other kinds of things of that nature.
Interesting. And did they have a like infirmary, like a medical place you could go if you had issues like that?
Yeah, if it got serious enough, it wasn't, again, they would have to uh, separate you, and again, it wasn't like with Gonzalo where they just, well, we don't really know what happened with him. I mean, he could have died from his illness or something else, who knows? But they would give you more like proper medical treatment.
Now, going back to Gonzalo, like, what's your hypothesis based on what you know, having been in a similar system, not Ukraine, but in
Mhm.
Russia? Uh, and do you think, like, how do you think that played out with him there in jail?
Okay, I'll be frank. He could have died from his own health
Hmm.
because, like I said, respiratory illnesses are a huge problem, and you are in these close, very confined spaces, and you can't just leave. Like you're stuck inside. so it is possible, from what I understand, Gonzalo Lira was a heavy smoker. He didn't have the best health. I think he ate from what he said, I think he ate a pretty lousy diet.
Mhm.
And so it was quite evident that he really wasn't in very good health. And so going into that kind of place with bad health and then not receiving proper medical care could do someone in, especially at his age. I mean, he wasn't elderly, but being in his 50s, it's going to it could take a toll on someone. Or he was outright killed at the behest of either the Ukrainian authorities or Biden and Newland and in that whole gang.
Yeah, and also with all due respect to Gonzalo Lira over on here, there was like a kind of a hit. There were a lot of hit pieces on him, and in fact, we should be these American reporters should be absolutely ashamed with themselves. Just the despicable and disgusting behavior that they helped contribute to some of the treatment here. Obviously, Biden was most likely the main force here. But one thing that I found interesting, and this may have this kind of illustrates the mental state of Gonzalo at that time. There were pictures of his living quarters or like his personal apartment up until like shortly before he was incarcerated, and it had really gotten very unhygienic, like in his apartment, which seemed quite different to say like I don't know 5 years ago. So that probably also didn't work too well. He carried that kind of habits into jail, correct?
Yeah, and that's another thing. I know he had some issues with fellow inmates. Again, I'm not like I mean I think it's terrible what happened to him. He didn't deserve it. He should have just been like kicked out of the country if the Ukrainians didn't want him there. But I would acknowledge that he could have died as a result of his own poor health. And as my brother said, it didn't seem like he was necessarily that like hygienic, clean of a person. And so I know for those of you in the free world, it might seem ridiculous that people would get mad over something like that. But trust me, even like when I was locked up, I would have people commenting on like say my hair, where it's like they expected that I had like really almost military style hair. I'm like, no, I'm like as long as it's not too long, it's fine. But I know with Gonzalo, he would grow, I think, very long hair, and it seemed like his apartment wasn't in the best of order. So he could have had issues with that, among other things as well. Again, I know it seems trivial for those who've never gone to jail or prison, but this can actually become an issue if you're locked up.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of something else too that my brother had said that the food options are actually surprisingly better than there in Russia than say here stateside. They seem to have it's more normal food. It's not like animal, dog, or cat food, correct, Todd?
Yeah, like
Okay.
I mean, of course, basics, but as far as I knew, I never from like the food, I never got sick. It seemed like I mean, it seemed like it was working out well for my body. I felt okay, so that's true. They're
And
probably
it
feeding. Sorry.
and also, were you able to drink alcohol or smoke and things like that there?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, and
I
how
mean,
was that? How did that work?
it was all like contraband. Like you could bring in like booze and other foods. So I would buy it like off the, I guess you could say, the black market. People in the American system probably think of hooch, that stuff that's homemade. I think you use like fruit juice and you put it like in a, I think like in a bag with sugar, and then you put it like in a warm area. In Russia, you can get like straight up like stuff out of a store. You don't have to drink hooch. You can drink like store bought vodka or something. It'll be smuggled in. So I had some like booze when I was there. It was
Interesting. Yeah, because it seems like many things can be bought in some way when you're in foreign
yeah
prison jail.
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting, Tyler, but yeah, I mean, I had like I could, I wasn't I wasn't just like drinking booze. I also tried to balance out my diet and have like fruits and
Mhm.
other kinds of items so that I was eating okay.
So how did that work with like the money thing? Did they let you folks keep cash, or did you have to? How did that system
Um,
work?
Honestly, what was common is that most of the people would have like contraband, like
Mhm.
cell phones, or
Okay.
like in my case, even like a tablet.
Mhm.
So Russia actually has a very good online banking system. So most people there would still have like a Russian bank account, and so they would money payments would be facilitated that way.
No, and that makes total sense. And also, I recall that you know someone actually that you were incarcerated with. He is currently still in the same place, correct? About a year later.
Yes,
Okay.
he's been, yeah, for over a year now. So unfortunately, that's the downside of, again, going back into kind of the uncertainty of when you're in a place like Russia. And again, this is the paradox, is that if you go to a country like this and you're a guy, on one hand, you're going to find it very favorable for, like, say, dating. And again, going back to Gonzalo, obviously, he had his experience in Ukraine, which, I mean, I have a different experience with Ukrainians than he did, but I don't know. I guess maybe it was good at one point. But was saying that when you have societies like this where there's a lot of uncertainty and instability, one of the downsides if you're locked up is that you may have basically what amounts to an indefinite sentence.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even this like this Kevin Burke had stated that Gonzalo literally should have crossed the border to Russia and rented out his apartment. And I would agree with them. It's unfortunate, obviously, is once his health took that decline, and also especially for us MGTOW people out there, this should be a great lesson. Where was his wife, his children? His children, understandably, but if they weren't there, but or her family, parents or relatives of hers, none of them were around. It appears to assist in any kind of affairs to get him out of this situation or help get him out of this situation. It's very odd, but I think this demonstrates that there's a statistic out there. I don't know if anyone here knows a very well-known podcaster from California or originally from New York, Michael Francisi, and this guy actually had stated that roughly, or it was actually a guy named Larry Lawton. I believe they were doing a podcast together. That roughly 90 or 95% of women divorced their husbands within the first year of the man being incarcerated, which is quite interesting because when you look at the statistics of women that are incarcerated, yes, many men that are married in the same situations do get divorced, but it's not nearly as high those numbers. So as we can see, his wife, there wasn't much help there in terms of his situation. When you were in jail, Todd, in Krasnodar, did you know anyone that was married that was going through a similar situation of a woman that was either divorcing them, a guy that had been divorced, and also one thing, you stated there were guys that had just gotten out of higher security prisons in Russia, correct? That were transferred there. I kind
Yes.
of worded a lot of questions together, so let me
um,
restate that. Did you know any guys going through divorce situations or had been like you would in the U.S.?
yeah, and funny enough, that was, well, maybe not funny, but that was actually one of the reasons some of the guys ended up there, is that they had these issues with women that they were either that they had been like in relationships with, and it would be like a guy from Armenia, and I don't know what would happen, but there'd be some sort of like domestic dispute, and then the guy would eventually end up locked up. And I knew at least, let me think here, at least two guys where this had occurred with, where they had some kind of issue with their significant other, and then that caused them to eventually end up in jail. And of course, their significant other didn't really care. And that's, I mean, here's the thing about it. And those of you who are red pill or MGTOW, I mean, know this, that a lot of times when you're in these situations, you're dependent upon other guys to help you do things to get through these issues. And I'm not saying there aren't women out there that will stay loyal to their guys, but like my brother was saying, once you get locked up and you're there, don't expect that she's going to stay with you.
No, absolutely true. And like I said, there were guys that Todd was with that he mentioned this. They had just gotten out of higher security prison for longer prison sentences. There was a fellow, I believe you said, that also got incarcerated that was about to go to a higher security prison for certain drug charges. Is that correct?
That is. There
Okay.
was a individual where he had caught an additional charge. He was locked up actually in the criminal system, and they I guess it was more economical for them or easier for them, instead of transporting him all the way to the nearest court where they could try him in the criminal in that criminal court. I think it was in Krasnodar. Instead, they thought, or they decided it would be easier just to hold him where I was being held, and then he was put through an additional trial there for this this drug offense, and he ended up getting a few extra years added on. So needless to say, he was not a happy guy. And his earlier, like his first crime, and I don't know if that was related to why he was being held in Russia, but I know that he had murdered someone and when he was younger, and that was back when he was from Turkmenistan originally.
Wow.
So yeah, he was definitely a pretty hardcore guy.
Yeah, and it's yeah, it seems like once the so like your experience in this jail, how did each day, how did each week feel? Was it like very mentally challenging, or was it one of these things that time flew by?
I would say time did not fly by, and it was a mental struggle because I didn't know how long it would last,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of uncertainty there. At first, I had been told it might only be a couple days, but then realized that wasn't going to be the case. So then I was thinking, how long will this be? Because I had met some guys that had been in there for months, sometimes a year or longer. So I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. And like this guy you had mentioned that was like sleeping on the bunk under me, he's still in there and he's been there since for over a year now. So really wasn't sure how long it would be.
Yeah, and also, folks, like if you're down, like if your money situation's bad over there, like in a jail, it's really tricky because my brother and a friend of his have been questioned numerous times for people to lend them money for X, Y, and Z, and many times they were from the Central Republics of Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and these guys like truly didn't have anything or anyone where they could really count on. So it's
Right.
like, what?
Yeah, again, I don't want to interrupt, but I think this is why, again, one of the reasons why Gonzalo had problems is I know he thought it was through the Ukrainian government. They found out he had some PayPal account with some money in it, and if you're in this situation, just act like you're poor, because otherwise there's going to be at least passive shakedowns for money. People are going to be approaching you nonstop, especially if you're from like a more developed country like America, Sweden, these kinds of places, Germany.
Mhm.
And I pretty much just put on the front like I was some really down and out poor guy, and there were still people that were not so dumb where they realized that probably wasn't the case, but that's basically what I held on to, that I'm a poor guy. I don't have any money.
Yeah, and I'm sure like people had techniques of like hiding their money in their shoes and whatnot, things like that. Did you ever see anyone get like beaten or anything like for like extorted for anything of that nature, or not?
I saw the outcome, but not the beating itself. No, those things I did not see in person, nor did I want to, just because here's the thing is that when you start getting proactively involved in like being nosy with these kinds of things, you start involving yourself in a way that you may not want to, and you may start attracting negative attention to yourself. So usually, even if you know that something maybe is a little bit what seems unjust, at least in the free world, we could say, unless you want to be ready to be fighting it out with people, it's usually better just to try keep to yourself and not involve yourself in some of these petty affairs or internal politics.
Absolutely. So at which time you were there for like, did you have an approximate idea when you guys would get like a timeline or any kind of departure day where you may be leaving?
Initially, yeah, yes, I thought, but then it wasn't what I initially thought. What was speculated. So basically, I had to get this release order through the Russian court system. Made a bribe to greatly expedite that. So instead of having to hold out for months or longer, it only took 3 weeks. Which, of course, at the time, I was. I keep in mind, I wasn't expecting that this was going to happen. Like if I was out like robbing banks or something, and then I got caught up in a situation like this, it would be expected to a certain degree. But I wasn't expecting that, like walking into that, into the Ministry of Internal Affairs office, that it would culminate to this.
And who did you make this bribe through, and who told you to do this exactly?
The internal, like, political hierarchy within the jail, within this prison jail. And
was it actual like officials, or was it like detained guys?
Detained guys, actually. And that's the craziness in the Russian criminal system. Often you're working through the people who are like the criminals are working with like the police or the court system. I know it seems crazy for people like in America, but again, I'm not trying to throw Russia under the bus, but that's how it works there.
Yeah, and one other plus, not that it's something to be proud of, but as far as Todd told me, people can actually still work. Like if they have a remote job or something, you can still access like internet, and you can still use some kind of tablet device. Is that correct, Todd?
Yep. Yeah, because just like you have in America now, all the contraband devices, same thing in Russia.
Okay, so that's a plus for anyone if they end up in that kind of situation. So at this point, this bribe went through and it met the right person. And then at which point did they kind of tell you you would be leaving?
It was like a day or two prior to the departure. And actually, when they came to retrieve me, I thought it was going to be like several hours after that. So I wasn't even, say, adequately prepared when they came and said, okay, you're out of here, to then like to transport me to the airport. It just happened so quick. So I was going to have like a final dinner with some of these people that I was closely affiliated with, and didn't even have time for that.
Yes, and something that a statement this noble made, Andrew Tate states that everything a man does in life art, education, entertainment is just to avoid fighting other men for resources and territory. Government stays in power because of all their firepower, and that I will totally agree with. That is the truth there. Do you have any statement on that, Todd?
I totally agree, and also the one other thing I'll add to people that subscribe more to say libertarian values, which I have a natural side of me does go more like I'm kind of torn on a political level between, I'm not going to lie, more third position, but on the other hand, libertarian. So it's like it's this conflict that I have where obviously third position is much more government intervention, but I see it if we're talking about being realistic, we're either going to have this really liberal like autocracy, or we're going to need something more like more nationalistic, I think. And even if you're in prison or jail, there's going to be taxes just unofficial. And as far as the statement about the resources, it's on point. And that's one of the reasons why guys in the manosphere or MGTOW, well, usually not MGTOW, I think it's these guys who say they're part of the manosphere, when they're talking about women, that's true. Like women are a big issue in terms of how they're behaving, but ultimately it's all these idiotic men that are enabling that to happen.
Yes, and that is indeed true. I think everyone here may know of Sandman, and I think Sandman most certainly reinforces that point. Sort of, I not completely, but Better Bachelor also I think does. And the other thing too is like when we look at like pro athletes and whatnot. I mean, I like sports and stuff, but yeah, a lot of this is like simulated fighting. Like if we look at like no, I mean nothing against like MMA or UFC and whatnot, but all this kind of like simulated fighting is precisely what Andrew Tate points at, that it is like actual fighting. A backstory here: our grandfather on our mom's side was actually in the Marine Corps, and funny thing about it is he had no interest, honestly, in watching organized sports after serving in combat zones for in two different wars. No interest in watching sports like as entertainment on TV, and so I think he probably kind of saw this in the same way that Andrew Tate would have seen it, but much more vivid because he actually experienced it, and that's very true. Okay, so is there any other like particular stories, Todd, that you experienced? Anything interesting that you saw while there in this jail during that time?
Yeah, there's a few things. I'm trying to recall. I mentioned the internal political hierarchy. There were, like I said, there were beat downs happening. I just wasn't personally involved in those. There were people that were, of course, getting into internal disputes with each other. There was also some amount of camaraderie. And I'll say this is that as a guy who I've lived by myself now for a long time, since I guess since I was 25 years old, I think. So as a guy who's been living by myself since I was 25, I've never lived with a girl before. I've lived with like a host family, with friends, with family. This was really the closest setting that I've been in with people for a long time. And I really felt when I was there, not like in a gay way, but that I got to really know some of these guys very well, and in a way that I can't even compare to like with I mean, of course, it's a different kind of relationship with a girl, but even the girls I was dating in Russia, I didn't really know them that well because we would hang out for like a few hours one day a week, and often it was very like trivial face value. It wasn't really. I mean, of course, there might be some, I guess, mean, of course, what happens between people that are in relationships, but it wasn't like, I didn't really feel like there was often meaningful, like a meaningful relationship established with these girls in the same way that a couple of these guys I was locked up with, maybe because we were in a less than desirable situation, I was able to really establish meaningful friendships with one guy, well, the guy from California, that was really helped me quite a bit.
Absolutely. And so, you had said that it was just a day before you were notified that you were leaving. And so what was that? How did that process work?
They just came in, told me I had like literally, when I say 10 minutes, it was 10 minutes to pack up all my stuff that I had there with me. And then took me in the car. It was the airport was called in English it would be mineral water. Like if you're interested, that would be the English translation, mineral water. It's in the Caucasus region of Russia, closest airport to the prison. So they took me, and I was next to a Armenian guy, and then a guard, and then a guard up front, and a guy who was driving. And the guy actually next to me had to leave behind he had a girl that, I don't know if it was like maybe a girlfriend, Russian, that he had a child with. And he was actually a really skilled guy. He'd been working in Moscow, like really skilled with interior, Armenian guy. So we got taken to the airport. He left first because his flight was much earlier, and then I had to wait like all day. And
so which airport were you taking? Was it Krasnodar or Stelchi?
Mineral water.
Is that close to Krasnodar?
Yeah, it's not too far. It's like in the Caucasus region. I'm not sure what the distance would be. If it was like
continue.
No, I was going to say if it was like American Interstate, it would be super quick. But in that region, they don't have American interstates.
And it had been roughly around 6 weeks that you had been incarcerated, correct?
No, it was closer to 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. And so did they purchase this plane ticket for you for getting out of the country? How did that process work?
See, they would have if I was willing to wait like 6 months or longer.
Wow.
So
why so long?
That's what it would take to process it. In my case, I was from the furthest away country of anyone that was there. So like you would expect of any government, they would drag their feet like no other, because that would not have been a cheap ticket for them. And they would have made it as inconvenient as possible.
And going back to one other thing, this friend of Todd's, I won't say his name, but he did a different option while he was incarcerated. There was a different alternative you could do to potentially stay in Russia, correct, Todd?
Yes, the route of political asylum, which is
okay.
And through him, they had also brought it to my attention that I could apply for that. And at the time, because of some other commitments I had, I was worried about those, and also how long would I be stuck there. And so looking back, I probably would have, I think they may have given it to me. But then at the same time, I had issues like with like my passport. I couldn't get a permanent passport in Russia because they stopped that when the war started. So if I say then I left the country, I would have more issues because I was on asylum status, and then I needed, like, I didn't have like just things related with like I said, passport, the management of my money matters, things like this. Russia now is kind of like an island in comparison to the West. And so it's its own, like you could say, Eastern Slavic kingdom, which of course has its benefits. But the downside is that if you're, say, connected to the West, it's going to be much more difficult now, and not because Russia's trying to do that. I mean, they haven't said, okay, we're going to cut off the financial system from the West. It's the West that's doing that to Russia.
Yeah, and this is interesting too, because everyone always looks at asylum as one of these things that we see, like these third world people from like Latin America, Asia, in these former communist countries, North Koreans and stuff. But there are indeed people from the U.S. that go and get asylum in other countries, and this friend of Todd's was one of those examples. If they feel like they're under really dire circumstances, like we saw with Snowden, or Assange could have, of course, done the same thing. Most certainly, you can go to Russia, and they will safeguard you. But also note that if you do something that's like, I don't know, we'll just say shooting someone or something, and it offs the person, then you'll be most likely unable to find anywhere to live. There are some circumstances where this option won't work, but this is something that I didn't realize that people would do this until my brother told me.
Yes, and this other individual had an extenuating, let's say there was a circumstance he had, just for his own, I don't want to say as a friend of his, but there's something else additional, and it's nothing bad. It's nothing really bad. I mean, for people that are more red-pilled, they might even support what I guess the U.S. considers to be like a criminal or some kind of other offense. But he had a extra factor there, you could say, that I think strengthened his application when applying for the asylum status. And it was something legitimate. He wasn't making it up. It was something legitimate. So as my brother said, if you do find yourself in trouble in some way, and even up to murder, you can go to Russia and you can get asylum. There's actually a guy, I can't think of the name, where he was involved, I think, in the murder of his ex-wife. I can't think of the name. It was John Mark Dugan, those of you know who he is, who had actually brought this up. And the guy can stay there, especially now. Why would Russia play ball with the U.S. now, or Western countries? I mean, of course they're not. So yeah, they're not going to be like, oh yeah, we'll deport this person. No, they're not going to have any incentive to do that.
Yeah, and so getting back, just to finish that, is this friend ended up getting out himself, and he got asylum, and now he continues living in Russia. So that was the other alternative Todd potentially could have taken. So getting back, he was en route taken to the airport. He had to pay for the ticket. What would have happened, Todd, if you couldn't have financed this ticket?
I would have been held for 6 to 12 more months.
Okay. So then it would have been very proper, like jail, prison sentence type of time there. And
Yes.
there are people, Todd knows people that were from like the Asian republics that were in these situations, and that's how it goes.
Yep.
You weren't in cuffs when you were in the car taken. Were these guards or police with you until you got to like a like security control at the airport?
Yeah, until I passed through customs. It was kind of funny though, because on the way, one of them was actually watching Scott Ritter and what's his first name? He goes by Judge Napolitano. They were actually watching a video. I guess those guys now are quite popular in Russia. So it was a difficult dynamic for me, because obviously I was very mad about the situation on one hand, but on the other hand, I think many of the values of these kinds of guys wouldn't be that much different to us. It was just, I was in a just, you could say, collateral damage of my own bad decisions.
Yeah, and so yeah, and that was also a pretty long time you were in Russia. You were there from early 2020 until 23. So I recall when I left Estonia in 2021, in the fall, it was a bit nostalgic, I will say, or like sad in some ways. Whenever you're anywhere for like a few years, you become very accustomed and ingrained to that kind of lifestyle and whatnot. So you got to the airport. Did your potential destinations, Todd, that you could go to at that point?
Yeah, I forgot that part. That I had two options. I could go either to US via Turkey or Uzbekistan, but I didn't end up going to the US. I got off my flight in Turkey, Istanbul, and then I ended up in Georgia. I was so exhausted by that point. I was like, there's no way that I'm going all the way to the US. So I got to Istanbul. I asked them what's the closest flight to the United States, or not to the U.S., where I don't need a visa, because my passport only had less than 2 weeks, I think, on it. I had this temporary passport, and they said, Georgia, they'll probably take you. And sure enough, they did. So ended up in Georgia. But there were some other things that happened, and maybe in a subsequent video I can go over those. When I think about it now, there maybe were a few other details I could have added, but it's hard just on the fly saying things. It's easier, I think, writing them down. I'll write some notes if this gets brought up again in the future.
And you said that when you arrived to, you first went to Turkey.
Yeah.
And what happened in Istanbul when you got there?
They said my passport didn't have enough days left, so I at that point I wasn't any longer in Russian custody, but the passport didn't have enough days, so I was like, there's no way I can fly this far to Turkey, or not to Turkey, to the U.S., because I had a connecting route. That's how you have to do it if you're incarcerated in Russia. You have to technically fly get a plane ticket that'll go all the way to the U.S. But I hadn't slept that well for that night. That night I hadn't really slept because that's when they got me, and then the night prior to that, so I was so tired, and I probably had maybe the bronchitis or something, thinking back, because I had some respiratory issues, but I was so tired, and so I just asked them, like, what's the closest flight? And then they said Georgia, so ended up going there, and that was, it worked out. I'm not here to bash Russia. It was just I made some mistakes, and they caught up to me.
Okay, and we had some listeners here. They had inquired to you, what are the repercussions? So, because you overstayed this visa, you were essentially deported out of the country. When can you return to Russia? How can that happen? Is this permanently noted in your passport?
Yes, I'm banned. I caught a ban of 5 years, and that was last February, so a little over 4 years left on that ban still. And so, yeah, the main thing is the entry ban. If I were to get caught up in Russia, or even like in Ukraine or something, I can't go to Belarus either. I'm banned from there because it's part of the Union state. How do I know that? Because I actually tried applying for a visa there and it was denied. So I can't, so I can't go to Belarus. I can't go to Russia. The occupied territories of Ukraine, I wouldn't be allowed to go either. And if Russia ends up taking all of Ukraine, which I think they may end up having to do, then that will be probably off limits as well. What else? Yeah, I'm thinking the entry ban, technically there was a fine, but I actually didn't pay the fine that was levied against me. And anything else? The main thing I'm thinking are the ban, the fine. If I get caught again, like if I were caught up in Russia or Belarus for some reason, then it's automatically a criminal offense, and I would be facing criminal charges, and I would probably receive a permanent ban from the country. This guy that you've heard about probably in the news, Aiden Aslan, I have no idea why he's taking the risk he is going back in Ukraine. I mean, to me, he seems like a really kind of ostentatious, or really, what's the word I'm looking for, Tyler? Like a strange guy, like very, I can't think of the word. And I can't, when I see that guy going back to Ukraine to fight, he's a moron, because if he gets captured by the Russians, at best, he's going to be facing a very long prison sentence, and it could be worse than that. So when I see that, I think this guy is an idiot. He escaped a death sentence, and yet he's back there like fooling around. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and something here that Kevin stated, just to interject. Yeah, yes, I believe you need to be a Chat A plus or race switch or master of a language, i.e. Spanish or Russian. Roosh discussed this many years ago. Would you say in Russia, being a Chat A plus is really valued, or do they care that much about those kind of traits?
Can you clarify? I mean, I know what Chad means, but what does Chad A plus mean?
I think it's like a number up to like 10, like 1 through 10.
Oh, on like the look scale?
Yeah, do Russian gals really value that much or not so much?
I can say this, to be frank. I mean, personally, I did quite well in the dating market there. I mean, for shorter term relationships, especially when I was trying, even in Moscow, you would think this is like the most cosmopolitan, richest city of Russia. I actually did really well with dating, even in Moscow. And in other parts of Russia, St. Petersburg, a lot of really weird kind of aloof people. They're not like similar to probably what you see in Europe, other parts of Europe, or even America. But if you're going to Russia, what I recommend is this: if you're, of course, if you can try to learn the language. And usually, if we're talking looks wise, what I think Russian girls prefer is either more of a lighter complexion look, like say we could say more Germanic. I think that's usually preferred, or say more of a Southern European look, Mediterranean. I would say these seem to be the most preferred. A lot of girls have some fixation with like French guys also. Not sure why, but I mean, it's women.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Todd. I kind of found the same thing when I was living there. Those were kind of the two most common prototypes that I came across consistently. And it's not to say that you can be something different, but there's another thing that I won't point out. So one of these people had said, it was back a few comments ago about not basically how America's like overrated. Americans use this Americanism to flex, and I totally agree with this statement. I realized that especially when I came back from like from Estonia to the US, when you have to like I had a good friend from Nigeria, and he had to showcase himself through like his actions and how just how he carried himself, and he couldn't flex using like his nationality, and that's a really good point there, that especially if you want this lifestyle to be sustainable, you're going to have to rely on your own like talents, on your own personal like efforts, and your pride has to be kept down, and you just have to be humble, and just as cliche as it sounds, just have intentional efforts with what you do and be smart about it. And don't think that just because you're under a certain flag, that's going to help you a lot.
What I have a question. Yeah, you're right. What do you think this Noble Savage comment about black pillars saying looks are everything? I think, looks definitely matter. I mean, it's good to be presentable. When you're in a country like Russia, though, I think And just like I would recommend of a guy anywhere. I mean, try take care of yourself. Is everyone going to look? I guess like I don't know, like I mean, what's even a 10 or a 9? I don't know. I mean, I think girls too will have different preferences anyhow. But if like if you're a guy, I mean, this is one thing I will say. I agree with some of the guys in the manosphere. I don't think you have to get totally jacked up and bulked up, but at least try to stay fit if you can maintain more of an athletic build. Maybe I shouldn't bring up this guy, but maybe you guys know who that Kohlberger guy is, the guy who committed these, or he's purported to have committed those murders. It like he like physically, I guess he was doing some fighting, and he was pretty fit. I think that would be like that kind of stature would be okay. A lot. Tyler can relate to this though. I saw a lot of girls in Russia that were with guys that were like chubby, honestly. Is there
Yeah.
anyone in the stream that has lived in Russia or does right now? Is there anyone?
Yeah, there's been at least one guy. He might comment. Um, oh yeah, most certainly Noble. Like, and also remember, like I put when I got back from Europe, I put on like so many pounds. Like currently, I'm in the process of lose. I had started losing the weight in the summer, and it's slowly coming off. Like, uh, I was up over 70 plus pounds, and now I've cut that to like 30 from where I was at. So, or maybe a little more than, but yeah, like I think another point too, as my brothers kind of mentioned, is it's not necessarily like being a really jacked bodybuilder. It's obviously it's having pride in yourself. Um like okay, so if someone say like a bodybuilder, that person could actually have really low self-esteem.
Yeah, didn't you
Um
and
what
didn't you know a guy when you were there where he was like, I mean, physically he was I guess would be considered a very good looking fit guy, and he was having a lot of trouble with dating there. Didn't you know a guy that was?
yeah, I did have a friend who was his parents were actually originally Lithuanian. I mean, he had what was like I guess a model like appearance. Um, look, I mean, flawless. He was like 6'3", 190 centimeters, and whatever he weighed. But yeah, he had a lot of trouble with the gals, personality wise and stuff. It was very challenging. He spoke Russian. There was just something there that didn't really it just didn't work so well. So um and yes, Kevin, I actually do exercise. I exercise today. In fact, my workouts have actually gotten more intense in the past couple months, especially. Um, what were you
Yeah, if I
saying?
can if I can throw this out there, I know this is on a different topic, but for those of you who, if you are trying to lose weight like my brother, and I told this to him, what I would recommend is intermittent fasting, of course, cutting out sugars as much as possible. Of course, if you eat a little bit of bad food, whatever, I mean, it's normal. We're all humans, but I think just cutting calories, if it's just pure weight loss, not like I'm not talking about like muscling up, just pure weight loss, cutting calories, especially sugars, and like spacing out your meals. Guess what people might call intermittent fasting.
Yes, Noble, and yeah, I would agree that um, yeah, a lot of these gym cells indeed are not naturally born with like they're not naturally the most gifted, you might say. There's a guy who goes by More Plates, More Dates. Some of you guys may know about him. He's from Canada. Um, I'll just say I think he would kind of apply because as myself, as someone who's not quote looks maxing, if I were to do that for a couple months, I'm sure, yeah, I would. I could. I mean, I could get ready for a magazine. You've seen real. One of these people here, I think it's Nobles from Portugal. if you look at Cristiano Ronaldo from when he was younger to now, it is incredible. Like the difference from when he was like 16 to like say 30. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that goes on.
Yeah, he
And
said.
that also can go the other way. If someone's say doing a lot of juicing and putting on a lot of muscle, it can actually cause more of an age effect, and it's certainly a lot of cardiac issues. But as far as like, I think it's all in proportion to how someone like a lifestyle for people who are living abroad. Um, if someone's making fitness like this guy, he's one of these guys that lives in Dubai, and he makes money from his fitness, from being aesthetically very like a 10, you could say. Yeah, it makes total sense. But if you're not in that spirit, you're not like a pro athlete, it's good obviously to maintain a physical well-being, but to flex on it or to use it as a way to sustain yourself abroad isn't usually going to be very practical.
Yeah, and if I can add this is I think in Russia, if a guy is even like moderately, like even just slightly above average, at least I can talk from the perspective of being like white of European background. I think that there's other aspects, at least for shorter. Like unfortunately, all of my relationships there were short, or maybe unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you see it. They were, I guess, what people would call like either one night stands, or like I was trying to have longer relationships. And unfortunately, as my brother knows all too well, I was just getting like dumped like girl after girl, which is what actually got me interested in MGTOW, is just going through this. And it was like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, and also, yeah, I agree, Noble. The teeth, yeah, most of these people get their teeth corrected within a certain age. It's very common actually in England. I've heard that people don't have teeth correction, and it makes a huge difference when you. I had in the summer, I worked somewhere at a restaurant, and I remember a gal I worked with. Physically, she had a phenomenal body. Her face was pretty good, but I mean, her teeth just really stuck out. So much so, like some of her teeth were way pushed into her gums, and that's one of the few cases, especially being a younger gal. She was 22. Where getting like teeth correction, I would say would be pretty. It would make sense, but that would be one of the few examples I'd say.
Yeah, having if yeah, especially if someone had really bad teeth. I mean, I know some guys will bring up like hair implants and all the cosmetic surgery and stuff. I would say to a person, Italy. Oh yeah, I get to share, but a lot of them get to share. Yeah, that's true, Noble Savage. Yeah, they're getting the and that's the funny thing about it is that in the mainstream it's made out to be that it's guys that pump and dump. In reality though, I've gone through this firsthand, there's a lot of girls that are I'm not saying guys aren't doing it, but there's a lot of girls that are doing the same thing. And unfortunately in my case, I was on the receiving side of this kind of behavior. So I'm not trying to make myself out to be a victim, but it's happened to me numerous times.
Yeah, and this actually also relates with Todd because um, people might know if you marry Russian, it's a lot easier to get like permanent resident status in Russia, and also to get this Russian passport. Was there anything else, Todd, that you were with where you thought potentially this could happen, and how did that work out?
Yeah, there is a girl that I'm not gonna lie, there's a girl that I'm still I still have some contact with, and I'll just put it like this: is that she she wants, okay, this is like what she would want is for me to get married to her, and then I take her to the United States, and I have to support her financially, and anyone that's from the US or Western country knows that you're taking a girl from Eastern Slavic country, dragging them to the US, and it's a disaster waiting to happen. Like I'm not saying that like there isn't a chance that the person's going to stay with you and stay loyal, but more likely than not, girls just going to find some other guy or guys and they're going to dump you, and then you're going to be out a lot of money. It's going to be heartbreaking, and you're probably going to be on the hook for who knows what else.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. I'm going to South America, to Argentina in 2 weeks actually. If you're okay, here's the thing about Argentina also is that there is a Amerindian or more conventional what people think of Latina population there, but more of the girls, if you're more into like say girls who are like of European background, believe it or not, the Argentines are generally of like mostly, if not all, European background. And there are many like very nice looking girls. Like if you want to see how it is, I'm not saying these are your best dating options or that these girls are going to stay loyal to you, but go onto like a dating app and like just check out like Bumble or Tinder, one of these dating apps, see how it is, because I have found Argentina to be one of the best countries for dating. And the thing there is that like if a girl's matching up with you on a dating app in Argentina, like it's actually going to go somewhere. Like if you want something like more like actually get some action with the girl, if you're in like say Eastern Europe or Central Europe, like where I am currently, you go into the dating apps, meet a girl, and much of the time it doesn't even go anywhere. A girl just waste your time and ghost you. If you meet a girl on a dating app like in Argentina, actually probably will go somewhere. If you meet her in real life, it often doesn't, and so it's kind of a bit different.
Yeah, and that also takes us back. Todd's one of the few people. I mean, in terms of the numbers that he's pulled in, like, I mean, we talk about the Rouge fees out there. I mean, Todd's been out with several hundred girls. Honestly, he stated he's had probably 6 or 7 girlfriends in Russia alone. He's gone out with gals in probably 20 countries, I would say. And is there anything you would add there, Todd?
I mean, pretty much that. I'm not going to lie, though. I have mixed feelings because it's a huge commitment of time. Many would say a waste of time and resources. But in terms of what I've seen, a lot of the problem, I will say this with women, a lot of the problem with dating is simply we hear the term incel. A lot of guys aren't incels, they're geocels. They're in the wrong locations.
Yeah. Yeah, and it looks like Noble has said that, which Todd's also brought up with myself about Eastern Europe becoming very similar to Western Europe. And you're also, of course, seeing in those countries all these Asians being brought in and also South Americans. And as he said, Eastern Europeans or chicks are proud to be gold diggers and are open about it. What do you think of that, Todd?
Yeah, I would say I can think offhand. Like I said that one girl I know literally would be willing to marry me now if and like all I would have to do is like fly, like I guess, which I'm not going to do, but fly her to the US and basically she gets to loaf off of me, probably find some other dude to get banged to like cheat on me with. Wait, the minarty. Yeah. Well, yeah, and a lot of Kevin, one thing I will point out is I'm not going to lie to you. I have mixed feelings about even guys like Andrew Tate, because the lifestyles that guys like him are pushing are actually like these kinds of lifestyles are making it hard for just, I guess, quote, average guys. There was even a guy that I don't know if you saw that video with Richard Cooper. Yeah, Russian Caesar. Yeah, there's more wealth in Russia, I think, than what people might think. Although I will say this, The average income in Russia is still not that high. It's something like, I think maybe five. It would be like maybe around $500 or $600 a month. The problem is this: Russian girls will often hold Western foreign guys to higher standards. So they're not going to be often evaluating you on the same metric that they would just evaluate one of their own guys in terms of finances. So they'll expect that, oh, this guy must be loaded. And I've had dates. I had like a date with some very good looking girls where one lived in one of my buildings. She was 23. I thought she seemed nice to me at first. We were communicating on Telegram. She had a very well-endowed body. That's the other thing. For those guys who like girls with big asses, big booties, go to Russia, or go to like Ukraine or Poland, because that's generally, Rush had actually brought this up, and it's true. If you're into that, that's what you're going to generally find with the Eastern Slavic girls, or even Polish.
Yeah, and what do you think what Kevin said about which I have to kind of agree about? This is actually something everyone here that Todd and I have spoken about, that Romania is indeed a kind of a welfare state. What's your opinion on that, Todd? You're obviously close to Romania.
I think all of the EU is. In fact, a lot of this is one of the problems in the European Union. In some ways, the EU is actually more of a welfare basket case than even the United States. That's one of the problems with dating, is that with some of these countries, some of these European countries, most of these European countries, they have a system that isn't going to make these women rich per se. They're not going to be living like high off the hog, but they will have their basics covered. And this is kind of the weird thing with women, is that while they'll have such high elevated expectations of us men in today's society, if they have some government or corporation providing them with bare minimums, because I guess it's a brand doing it and not just a person, they're okay with that.
What about this one?
All the hot chicks in Russia left from the towns to the big cities or the west. There are a lot that do go to the big cities, but there's also a lot in these smaller towns. The key, though, is if you're going to go to those areas, is try to learn as much Russian as you can, because they are not going to be speaking in English. And I'm not going to lie, if you have like a phone or a tablet or something, I've had relationships where this is how I communicated, because I wasn't speaking so well in Russian at the time. The problem with these kinds of relationships is, again, I'm not here to give relationship advice, but a girl might stay with you for a couple months and then she's probably going to go. English. Yeah. Well, yeah, and this is the challenge. I'll tell you what the challenge is with the whole dating situation in English is, on one hand of things, it makes it a lot more convenient. And I also ask myself, why don't they know English? Like, to me, there's something there maybe with like intelligence where I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird that English, I know it's maybe not easy to learn, but it's not the hardest language. And why can't they speak English? But at the same time, that means they're also not as westernized.
Yeah.
For what? I think Romania is overrated. I mean, seriously, Romania is overrated. Like I'm in Poland now, and I think these guys, what they're, I mean, look, I will say this again. These countries are better, or maybe a lot better, than trying to date, say, in America or Canada. But if we're talking, say if we're talking Poland in comparison to Russia, for instance, Russia would be much better. Or Romania in comparison to Russia is definitely better, a lot better.
Yeah, and there's something also both Todd and I can relate to. I mean, when you cross over from Russia, I remember the first time when I flew into Russia in 2017. It was actually the day after Christmas, and like it feels very different. I mean, it's not like when you fly into, say, Estonia, or you fly into, say, like Poland. There's just like different feel there. Like, or if you cross by train from Estonia over to Russia, very different. The vibe and everything is you know, you're kind of in a different empire, as I describe to folks, and that's often a good thing when it comes to if you're trying to escape a certain system, or like whatever it might be. I mean, also though, remember that at the end of the day, financially, you need like sustenance to sustain yourself long term. So it's really important that you like are on top of that. Like if it's already there initially, it's way easier when you end up in one of these countries. Otherwise, you may be in a position where you have to move somewhere else for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that's true. And there 78 cents. Yeah. Well, certainly, I mean, in like I could see that like in the Philippines. Like now if you're like an older guy, and if you're like say in your 50s, 60s or beyond, go to the Philippines. I know a guy, he goes by Every Man Has a Story, 68 years old, wedded up a girl that's in her 20s, and he's having a child.
Yeah, she's pregnant, this woman or
Yeah.
girl, whatever you want to call her.
Apparently, yeah, and like if you go, there's a lot of like these guys. So if you're not like, I would say, if we're talking Russia and Belarus, I guess some guys have luck with Ukrainians. I don't know why I did not have luck with Ukrainians. I mean, I did just fine with Russians and Belarusians. Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's noticeable. Like one of the things when I remember going between Estonia and Russia was even like this, like the clothing and stuff that you would see girls that were from Russia wearing often looked more how do you say this? Like not in a bad way. I mean, they weren't like sloppy, but it didn't look as elegant, we could say, as what the Estonians would be wearing, because Estonia economically is considered, I guess, higher. What I mean, not that that means anything in today's world, but you could even tell, like if you're on a bus or some other mode of transport, often I could distinguish who were the Estonians from the Russians, because the Estonians would often be like, you know, very immaculate and like elegantly dressed, whereas Russians not as much. But that's a good thing. That means that Russian girls are not going to have such elevated like wealth standards or income standards. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
What's
no,
that drug called? There aren't guys getting drugged.
scopamine.
Scopamine.
Yeah, it's scopamine in Colombia, and that's something like this kind of. I don't know if I should. I'll let Todd address this because he's obviously headed to Argentina in just a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's scopamine. That's one of the biggest issues right now in Colombia. What were you going to say, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, what like as far as like like the dating situation, like I said, I have more experience with like Argentines. I'm not going to lie, like I generally prefer girls of European background. So I would say if you like more of a European complexion girl, and where you're not going to get drugged out, I would recommend Argentina, because this these things I'm hearing about like in Colombia, it's I'm not saying every girl's going to do that kind of thing, but it is a serious risk. And I think you're dealing with again, I don't like saying this, it's just reality that intelligence wise, your typical Colombian is going to have that ideal criminality IQ range, I think in the 80s, where even in Argentina, maybe it's not a good rep, or maybe it's not right of them, but even in Argentina, the Colombians are often regarded, or Venezuelans, as being often more criminal minded. And fortunately, it might be true to a degree.
Well, and let me ask you, Todd, because we got into the last part. Todd ended up in Georgia once this whole deportation ended.
Yeah, don't go there if
Um,
you want women.
no, Todd's been basically for the past like 10 months. He's been between Georgia, Poland, Germany, anywhere else,
Yeah,
Azerbaijan,
Hungary.
Armenia, yeah,
Yeah,
Hungary,
Hungary,
Armenia.
Armenia. Where
Um,
else?
no, what was the like cause for you to just scrap any of these places and then decide to go to Argentina like in the past few
Uh,
months? What was the game changer there?
I mean, okay, so last year I had a Polish girlfriend, and I had a Polish girlfriend, and I'll be frank about it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Um, I mean, she was okay looks wise. Like, really, it was a downgrade from what I was getting in Russia. I don't know what she was, maybe like on the look scale, maybe like a 5 or 6. So I mean, she was okay, but she didn't treat me that well, honestly. Like, it was actually her who dumped me. And so after her, I did try go out with some girls, other girls, like with some. I met some Ukrainians here. I met a Belarusian, and it's nonsense. Like, the girls will just waste your time. They don't care. They have no kind of concern about time or your feelings. They could care less about. And the in one of these gals that I was going out with, which I learned the hard way, was like a school teacher who claimed to be a Christian. Like, she and this is a lesson for you guys out there. If a girl says that they are a Christian, proceed with caution, because often it is so fake, and what they classify as Christianity is so bastardized that it doesn't mean almost anything. I've had interaction with girls who were, say, Arab, and they were like they were Muslim, like they were Sunni Muslims, and they were from like UAE, and I mean they were the real deal, like very respectful and nice and stuff. The problem is, if you're not like an Arab dude, like an Arab Muslim dude, they're probably not going to like usually date you. But yeah, when it comes to this whole dating thing, if a girl's like, "Oh, I'm a Christian," and sadly, it doesn't mean a whole lot in today's world. Or if a girl's like, "Oh, I'm girly girl," like I'm a girly girl. That's what this Polish, uh, I'll just say this Polish bitch told me, like, "Oh, I'm some girly girl." Like, it's like, what the heck does that even mean? Like, every time I've been said, like, where that's what the girl says, they usually end up treating me like absolute garbage, and that's how it was with her. So I'm like, okay, what the heck does girly girl mean? Like, I mean, of course, I want girls that look feminine, that, like, look presentable, but whenever I hear that, it's always some idiot. Yeah, you don't. What's that called? Is that level? Isn't that a MGTOW cowboy? Isn't that called like level 8 MGTOW? What's that called, Tyler?
Which one?
Where you don't date anymore?
Um,
That's
yeah,
what
something like that. Todd actually has a good many like ideals on this one that Noble just posted.
modern Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I can say this: the closest thing I think to authentic Christianity in today's world might be Russian Orthodoxy, and I think even Rush V had written on that. That's probably the closest thing that we have to anything authentic. I mean, for people who actually adhere to that, but otherwise, it's a joke. I mean, it really. What influence does Christianity have in today's Western societies? I mean, it's a patriarchal religion. My brother and we knew this guy in Estonia. Um, no, I don't want to put the guy on blast, but basically I had a disagreement with someone who was in theory trained in theology, and he disagreed with me that Christianity is a patriarchal religion. I mean, it's in the Bible, and yet there are people who claim to be even in the church experts in the Bible, and they will claim that this isn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
P2P. What's P2P? Do you know what that is, Tyler? MGTOW Cowboy. What's P2P?
I'm not, yeah.
Is that peer to peer?
Could be.
Monk mode, yeah.
Pay to play.
Paid. Oh, yeah. And that's actually, I'll be frank, that's the most efficient way for a guy. I knew a guy even in Russia who he had been living in the U.S., got totally fed up with it by his early 40s. He had been married to a Danish woman. He had worked on his own, like as an independent consultant guy, could do all types of IT work. Was making, what's this?
You can continue what you were saying.
Yeah, he was making good bank. He had been married, and you know what he said to me? That, like, I mean, keep in mind, this was a guy who, I mean, generally speaking, he tried to be more like he felt that the best model for the West would be a kind of this resurrection of a more, like, say, nationalistic Russia, which I don't disagree with. And so within the Russian government, they have tried to, say, push back against feminism, but they've also been I can't say that they're necessarily our friends, but they have tried, and they're not really probably so big into, like, the, men going their own way, let's say. So this guy who generally tried to go with kind of the Russian line on things, his idea was that pay to play was much better value than, like he said, when he was married to this Danish woman when he was in South Carolina. He said that was the most expensive sex that he ever had.
Now, what Noble said too, I mean, this is a very good point that he makes about these barbarian women. What's your ideals on this, Todd?
Yeah, I will say that it's weird because maybe it's because the girls that I'm attracting are like these weird anomalies where, like, if I seem at all, like, I guess, aggressive or something, they won't even, they'll just ghost me. But maybe I'm just attracting the wrong kind of girls. I'm sure that, like, if a guy can attract those kind of women, because usually the kinds of, like, women that I've dated or girls I've dated, not that, like, I don't care about, like, their education level or this nonsense, but usually they are girls who tend to be, like, more educated, I guess more professional. So I don't really like, I mean, at least if I want things to go anywhere, I usually don't attract girls that are really, like, just, like, very basic in the sense. Again, I'm not like, of course I don't support feminism, but girls that just want to be very simple and just submissive to guy, I don't really attract those kinds of girls, unfortunately.
Just give me a moment, guys. I'll be back.
And hyper gynocentric, you don't. Right. And this is something I will say, that in many countries for dating, you're going to be better off than in America. It's just to what degree. So even, like, if I want to, if I get onto, like a dating app or something in, like, say, here in Poland, can I get a match? Yes. Is it, like, easy? Like, if I'm looking in Argentina, I can get a lot of matches. Here, maybe not so many. But if you can get a girl, like, in bed, you're not going to have to deal with those rape, for example, rape accusations, even in a country like this, in Poland, and in most places in the world. Again, not really the reality, but yeah, if you're in America, it's huge risk. Your options are terrible usually. I've heard, like, I see all these videos popping up of guys that are like, oh, I'm a 35-year-old incel. I'm a 35-year-old, I'm a 40-year-old who's never had a girlfriend. I've never like, and I mean, look, like I said, I have full respect for guys that choose to like just be like, okay, I'm done with dating. This is ridiculous. I saw a guy who had been burned by this single mom that he married that had 5 children. He went into the marriage with her having 5 children. He was sick of being burned, and he's like, after this final marriage he had, he's like, I'm not like gay or anything, but I'm probably done dating. I can't remember what the guy went by. My brother, I think, might know his name.
Which person?
Yeah, who was the guy who was married to that woman who had the genital warts? Who she was working in the prison. She had 5
He's
children.
like a new MGTOW channel. His name is like Lunchbox or something. His name I think is Chris. Yeah.
That's it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, MGTOW Cowboy. I think, and see.
Anyway.
Yeah, and as far as the with like the P2P option, P2P, it's hard for me mentally to like, I know that's the best, it's the most economical and probably the most practical, especially if a guy's not going to be having like any children or anything like this. I have a really hard time like still putting myself into that mindset, but I'm sure maybe if I'm a little bit older, perhaps I can. Yeah, being a yeah,
maniac not at 32.
Well, and it's funny too how some of these guys who have gone from like being I guess incels to then becoming like, I guess, mass murderers, they get a lot of fan mail from women.
And I have a question also for that novel. You said you're from Portugal. I can't imagine that's a very common like persona. Is that over in Portugal?
A noble savage from Portugal?
I believe he said he was Portugal.
Can you ask him why are like tell me if I got this
wrong? What was the question?
Okay, my question is why are a lot of Southern European guys still kind of like blue pilled? Like, if this makes sense.
Yeah, Noble, I think he can answer. I believe it was Noble. Maybe it's someone else. Like Todd said, why is there so much blue pill kind of in cuckery in this part of the world? I mean, even compared to like in Brazil, it seems to be more like dynamics seem to be a little different. Like, whereas, yeah, it's unusual. It's in that sense over in Portugal, and it seems like you had made this point, Noble, that a lot of these Southern European, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese guys have I mean, looked over at other places. There's a famous author, I can't remember his name. He was Italian, and he had pointed out in the 1920s there were Italian guys looking abroad, like in Russia, for dating. So it seems to be like that's been going on so long. I think Rushdie also made this point.
Yeah, and regarding this,
we'll go back to this MGTOW Cowboy point.
Oh, nice job. Yeah, nice job, MGTOW Cowboy. Well done.
Yeah. Broad smacking. What's broad smacking? Do you know that?
I think, is that where people are like, it's the easy, like I think going for like the easy girls or something, maybe.
I've never even heard that term.
Because like I've never been to Portugal, Noble Savage. Oh, yeah. That's the same thing. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because, like, okay, when I was in Russia, there are a lot of girls in Russia that are interested in dating Southern Europeans, but that was something that did come up as a like kind of a complaint. Which, again, I'm not saying that like oh yeah, like women, like what they say really has a lot of value in today's world, but that was something that came up that that they
Yeah,
were
and
tired of that.
yeah, and I think also you said in Argentina that was a common occurrence.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah, yeah. Because Argentina generally has a, I guess it's kind of a hybrid between Latino and Southern European, but most of the Argentines were of Southern European background, so it has a lot of. Oh, I got you. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, something yeah, MGTOW Cowboy, that's awesome. That's actually originally over 2 years ago what I was the direction I was going to take. I actually think presently how I am, I would be suitable to drive. Like I was really like I had a lot of trepidation for that. Now actually I feel like I would feel fine to do that. But it's all obvious in the past. Like once you get some endorsements for your trucking, of course, whether it's like specialized equipment or there's particular areas where you'll really see a big jump in your pay. I mean, you can double that pay eventually if you go owner operator or something more. And also, of course, you have a YouTube channel. So if you put effort in there, you could also grow like a following. Not
Oh yeah.
just grow on YouTube, but you could grow enough of a following to launch like some kind of business in this kind of sphere. There's still a lot of potential in trucking, in my opinion, even with all the problems during 2021, 22, the past year. I still think there's if you're in the right niches, if you're smart, if you're watching me, you're a smart guy, honestly. MGTOW Cowboy.
Yeah, I'll also add that even people coming from Eastern and Central Europe will go into trucking. I remember this girl I dated. She's a Russian speaking Kazakh, and she lives in Miami now. Now again, I didn't take her to the U.S. She went to the U.S. on her own volition. But one of the areas that she had talked about going into was actually trucking, and she was 23 years old. Now she's 24, but yeah, there's
So yeah, going back to Noble, it looks like he said that it's basically giving.
knuckle sandwiches.
I didn't think that still happened honestly in Portugal, but I guess it does. Do you like what do you think of Portugal? I mean, you said here, Noble, that yeah, many guys still live with their parents beyond the age of 30, which of course is not like other like say Nordic societies. Um, let's see, or let me go back. Yeah, it's Portugal though. Like the population decline there has just been. I mean, it's been on the decline for so many years, and this might be one factor here. Um, I have one. Like I just want to make a quick pause here. I can conclude this video and just move in another one if does that work for you, Todd?
Oh yeah, it's fine. It's quite late here, but I want to
Yeah.
say that it's been a real pleasure. And what I'll say this.
Mhm. What, do you have any like concluding remarks, like
Yeah.
on your overall so this whole detention experience in Russia? What would you take from that, and what do you think moving forward? Will you try go back and return to Russia?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I would recommend staying out of jail. Jail, prison in most countries is really not very unpleasant, especially if you have half a brain.
Mhm.
Uh, it can be really boring also. And I am trying to overturn my entry ban into Russia, which I didn't mention before. I think I still see Russia as being one of Europe's last hopes. Anyone that's here in the European Union knows what it's all about. It's so globalist, feminist, pro-feminist. Yeah, marginally speaking, is dating maybe a little better in one EU country to another, of course, but still, it's still all part of that globalist your EU hegemony. And
Yeah, so it looks like Todd's probably going to be headed to
yeah,
Argentina in a couple weeks, correct? More or less.
yeah, that's the plan. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
I did. It was great when I was there before. And trust me, I know about the country. I know you do have, like, at least in theory, it's maybe more feminist or whatever. But, like, I don't know. My experience, like, with the women there was fine. So I don't. Um, I can't say that. Like, I did have a bad experience with my first girlfriend. She was awful, but I was stupid also the way I dealt with that whole situation. She was jerking me around, and I know I learned after that it was really dumb the way I did things, but that wouldn't happen again.
Yeah, and yeah, I also can see that. Like, your approach now is in Todd also for even U.S. standards is making a very good income. Milk guys here that are still here, a lot of guys do not financially do very well when they go to other countries unless they're living off like these pensions or some kind of like it's some maybe some kind of money that's coming from back home. Like I say, I actually have to work and making money, whether it's based in said country, like there or abroad. I mean, they don't do very well. Todd's one of the few exceptions. I mean, yeah, most guys at some point will run out. That's why, like with Rouge, I'm not going to say how his situation was, but Rouge V was probably in kind of both arenas. Like the income was starting to really decline because PUA was starting to become something kind of a joke, honestly, in many of these European countries. And then he also was, like his age and stuff was factoring there, but I just think he wasn't really motivated for the right factors. If you have the right motivation, you'll last. But
yeah, the pickup isn't what it used to be. It's not. I'm not saying that it can't work at all. It's just nowadays with the mass adaptation of social media, you have the dating apps. You have, and again, this is basically reiterating some of the same things Rush had said back a few years ago. I know he had spent time in Poland. Rush would, like, his opinion was that Poland was just the greatest country for dating, at least for banging, like, I guess, short-term chicks. I've been here in Poland, and I have to say I don't agree with Rush on that. At least that hasn't been my experience. But then again, Rush was more, he said Russia wasn't so good for him. For me, Russia was great. So maybe it depends on the person also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that each place is going to have a different fit for depending on the person.
Yeah.
And one other thing, Todd, as far as your outlook at dating in Russia, like for most guys, would you say it's a good option or would you avoid it?
Yeah, especially if you're more into girls that are like more white or European, it's probably the last major country where there's any chance of having some remnant of normalcy. Now, with saying that, I would not expect that you'll meet a girl that might stay with you long term. But if you're okay with something that's shorter, I think Russia still offers probably the best potential for Europe, at least.
Yeah. So yeah, that's about it for everyone. Greatly appreciate everyone that's here. On some of these other points, we'll definitely continue covering these because I think there are other areas that I can cover here that will get a lot of engagement, honestly, on this channel. And there's still a lot of misunderstanding on everything, honestly, especially stateside. So so like I said, everyone, hopefully I can continue this on tomorrow. But otherwise, have a great evening. And thank you, Todd, for presenting. and this is a great story for everyone to learn from.
All right. Bye-bye.
So, yep, have a
Take
good
care.
one.
Thanks.